Story number 1. The Maine cottage stalker. For a 22-year-old named Leo, a remote island represented a physical barrier between his present and a troubled past. The psychological allure of total isolation, a place where life feels like it is happening to someone else, offered a temporary sanctuary. He needed to disappear for a few days, and crossing open water seemed like the most effective way to ensure he stayed gone. This search led him to a standalone cottage on a tiny island off the coast of Maine. The price was suspiciously low even for a single room set back from the rocky shoreline. By sunset, the day trippers had all boarded the ferry back to the mainland, leaving the island nearly empty. There were no streetlights and no ambient noise, only the sound of the ocean pressing against the brush surrounding the cottage walls. That silence lasted until the middle of the night. Leo woke to the sound of heavy boots crunching on the gravel directly outside his door. The footsteps were methodical, separated by long, unnatural pauses. They didn't pass by the cottage. They stopped right at the entrance. He stayed frozen in bed as the door handle turned, and the weight of a person began slamming against the deadbolt. The intruder clicked on a flashlight, sweeping the beam through the thin, semi-translucent curtains. Then the person on the other side of the door spoke. A man's voice, one Leo didn't recognize, whispered through the wood, "I know you're in there, Leo." The intruder spent the next hour circling the perimeter, taunting him with the knowledge that his location was no longer a secret. He stayed awake until daybreak, finally stepping outside to find heavy boot prints circling the cottage multiple times. The tracks led in a straight line from his front door toward the dock, ending at the waterline. A specific blue motorboat he had seen moored nearby the previous evening was gone. Leo had traveled to the island to hide, but the same water that kept the mainland away also acted as a perimeter. Crossing the ocean didn't stop a motivated threat from finding him. It only guaranteed that when they arrived, there was no one around to help. Story number 2, the Hashima Island encounter. Isolation operates on a much larger scale at Hashima Island, a massive concrete fortress off the coast of Nagasaki. Known as Battleship Island, it was once a densely populated coal mining hub before being abandoned in the 1970s. It is currently a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but the crumbling apartment blocks are strictly off-limits to the public due to the extreme risk of structural collapse. A graduate student working as a structural engineer, a specialist who evaluates the physical stability and safety of buildings, secured a rare permit to study the island's concrete decay. His visit was strictly managed by a government escort named Takeshi. Takeshi was impatient and insisted the engineer remain within his line of sight at all times, enforcing rigid boundaries as moving through the ruins. Exploring the forbidden residential blocks revealed physical anomalies that decades of abandonment couldn't explain. Paths were worn into the thick dust, as if the route were used regularly. In one room, a sickening, non-human odor filled the air, and the concrete walls were radiating heat despite being shielded from the sun. When the engineer pointed out the smell and the heat, Takeshi's reaction was dismissive. He insisted that no one lived on the island and refused to even enter the room to investigate. Instead, Takeshi pulled out his radio and began speaking rapidly in Japanese to an unknown contact, the first time he had used the device since they arrived. The engineer continued his survey of a central tower where he discovered a pile of blankets and several empty water bottles hidden in a corner room. The items were fresh, indicating that someone was actively inhabiting the supposedly empty concrete maze. He turned back to the hallway to show Takeshi the discovery, but the escort was gone. Left alone in the tower, the engineer sprinted back toward the stairs, only to find the exit landing completely blocked. A fresh pile of heavy concrete rubble had been dumped across the path since they had climbed up just minutes prior. He ran through the corridors, searching for any other way down, as multiple sets of heavy footsteps echoed from the darkness behind him. He was being pursued through the ruins by more than one person. He eventually found a secondary stairwell and bolted toward the docks, driven by the immediate need to escape the building. Takeshi was standing by the boat at the dock, looking completely unfazed. He ignored the engineer's frantic claims about the people in the building and the block stairs, simply stating it was time to leave. 2 weeks later, back in the US, the engineer tried to contact Dr. Yamamoto, the professor who had arranged the trip, only to find he had completely disappeared. The coordination required to block the stairwell and patrol the building suggests Hashima's isolation is an active choice. Story number 3. The North Brother Island Entity. The island functions as a perimeter maintained by a system designed to keep a secret in plain sight. Within New York City's East River lies North Brother Island, the site of a former quarantine hospital. A quarantine hospital is a facility used to isolate individuals with dangerous communicable diseases to prevent an outbreak. It has been abandoned for decades, leaving the brick structures to be swallowed by dense forest and urban decay just miles from the Bronx. 3 friends, Jansen, Jesse, and a history student, kayaked to the island at 2 a.m. for an illegal exploration trip. They pushed through tall weeds and thick overgrowth to reach the ruins, standing in total darkness. The island was silent, creating a sense of total isolation, despite the city skyline being visible across the water. While the others stopped to explore a large building, the narrator wandered off alone. He walked down a long, dark hallway of the old hospital complex, guided only by his flashlight. The further he moved from his friends, the more the empty rooms branching off the corridor began to feel like a trap. A voice suddenly called his name from a room further down the hall. It was clearly Jesse's voice. The narrator called back, confused as to how Jesse could have gotten ahead of him so quickly. A second response came from a doorway just a few feet to his left. This time it was Jansen's voice saying, "In here." He stepped into the room and swept his flashlight toward the corner. Standing there was a figure over 6.5 feet tall, facing the wall and remaining perfectly still. It was not Jansen or Jesse. The narrator screamed and bolted from the room, running until he found his actual friends who had never left their original spot. They fled for the kayaks, but as they pushed into the water, a new sound drifted from the dark woods. It was the faint, distinct moaning of an older woman in pain. They paddled back to the mainland and never returned, haunted by the fact that the voice in the hallway had sounded exactly like Jesse. Whatever was in that room mimicked a familiar voice to lure its prey closer. We seek out these islands believing the water keeps us safe from the world, but the water also keeps us inside. These locations function as cages, trapping us with whatever forces are already waiting in the dark.